Hi, it's Marcus Raimondo from Pondered, where we question everything, but we believe nothing at all. So the concept of pondered is simply to question stuff from the basis of a simple question and see how far we can extrapolate it. Today, I want to talk about freedom. So the question I'd like to pose is, freedom. Is it really something that we have, or is it just an illusion? Well, based upon the concept that I'm having in regards to all this, well then I have to first ask is, what is freedom? Is it something that is in your head, or is it something we realistically have? Is freedom the ability to move from one place to another without the restriction of a society or a restriction of a system? Or is freedom the ability to, well, let's just go back to the freedom for travel. Having the freedom to travel to a certain place, is that really freedom? If we're traveling to a certain place and being able to go to places which are detrimental to our health, is that freedom? I mean, literally, if we were able to go, I know people who go to third world countries and they take advantage of the financial situation of people for pleasure. Is that freedom? Is it freedom to the people that they go there for? I mean, to be able to explore one's personal expression of your imaginations and stuff, is that freedom? Or is the restricting of oneself away from those things freedom because you're restricting yourself away from the detrimental effect of something? I mean, we're so preoccupied with the concept of freedom that we don't actually think so much about what is freedom overall. I mean, the ability of these people I know who go off and take advantage of, let's be honest, the poverty of another race or another people because we've got more money so that they can enjoy a pleasure. Is that really freedom? Is it freedom for the people they're going to spend the money on? Is it freedom for these people who are taking that money to be able to choose that? Or is it their financial poverty that's actually not freedom at all? We're so preoccupied with freedom in our society that we think that being able to travel regularly or to be able to have the biggest car or the biggest house, is that freedom? Or is realistically having those things, having to choose those things for yourself, where you go buying a big house and having a big expensive car and filling the house with heaps of furniture? Is it freedom? Or is it really just another societal con, like back in the old days? You know, back in the old days you had societal expectations. Is now the modern societal expectation the freedom to have lots of stuff? Is it really freedom when it's the societal expectation to do these things? I mean, we're choosing to do things based upon what society expects as successful. I mean, realistically, in the pecking order of our society, if you travel in more countries, somehow you're higher in a pecking order. Is being higher in a pecking order by the term freedom really real freedom, because you're pursuing a set of ideals and concepts which are classified as free, like people are saying now, to have no children. I don't want to have children because I lose my freedom. But then again, is having no children also missing out on all the quality connections? So realistically, being restricted by having children, is that not in itself another form of freedom? Because all of a sudden you can choose to have, you're restricting yourself in one way, so I suppose it isn't actually a loss of freedom, but on the other side of things you get all these relationships and stuff which you didn't have before, which are now brings more fulfillment to your life, and you have the freedom to have more people involved in it and more people stuff. So that in essence is freedom as well, even though one form of freedom is restricting the other sort of freedom and the other sort of freedom is restricting the other freedom. Is it really free? Is it the wrong word that we're doing? Or is it just another level of adjustments that society has given up on? You know, are we really choosing the right word here? To be able to choose to do a certain path, is that real freedom when that pathway is expected by society? In our society we have the freedom to choose whatever career you want to be. I chose to be a plumber, all right, which I don't regret. I thoroughly enjoyed my career choice. But to choose to be a plumber means that I have, in essence, given up all other choice. Is it better than by modern society to choose to not commit to anything at all, so that you have all the options in front of you? Plenty of people seem to choose that now, and they spend bits and times doing this, and this. Is that real freedom? Or is it actually an exclusion of freedom because you're not committing to a path? Like myself, I've committed to a path of being a plumber my whole life. Is that restricting my life? Or is it enhancing my life? Or is it, there is a certain level of things which I will never experience because of the choices that I have made. But at the same time, had I not chosen to do this path, would I have lost the depth and the intensity of learning in a narrow end of my life had I not done that? So therefore, is freedom, what I'm trying to say is freedom really freedom, if you really think about it? I'm not sure it is. Our society is so preoccupied with this concept of, we're almost obsessed with it, to have the freedom to choose to do whatever we like, and we don't even think about consequences anymore. My friends who go off and go to third world countries to take advantage of their young women, is that really freedom? They're losing the depth of the relationship. They're losing in many ways the quality of their life. And they're losing, I personally think, in a way, they're losing respect for themselves. They might disagree with that. And then realistically, in many ways possible, that is actually a fair comment. Is it reasonable to say that that choice is in essence a narrowing of their world? Yes, in a way I would agree with that. But I don't necessarily think that is a good thing. When the question becomes that we have to live our life for freedom in itself, is that the right question in itself? Is freedom, to have the most freedom in life, to be able to constantly pursue this never-ending pursuit of more choice, more experiences, more stuff, for the sake of meeting our new criteria to prove that we have the most freedom and the most everything that we can possibly have, the most choice, the most excess? Is that excess and choice really good for us? If it was, then why is our society so sick than it used to be? Going back in history, our society was happier. Why was it happier when we had, in essence, less freedom? Back in the old days, we were in clubs. We would be in careers for life. I've been in a career for my life. Being in a career for life doesn't seem to be respected anymore. Certainly not as much as it used to be. What is real freedom? If we're going to be really discussing freedom in our life, should we not really understand what the concept means? I think, society in its own way is criticizing people who are choosing to do things differently. The amount of people who get criticism because they choose to have a family now, or they choose to have many kids. It's like, what are you doing? What about the extra car you could have, or what the extra stuff? If real freedom was real freedom, aren't we meant to have the freedom to choose? Even if that choice is a restriction of our freedom, because if that restriction of freedom, wouldn't that not be, in essence, real freedom? To be able to choose to have a restriction of freedom, like myself. I chose to be a plumber, and that restricted my freedom from doing so many different things. And yet, I'm so glad I did, because I really enjoyed my career path. So if we're doing our different choices in life, and even if those choices in essence were to be involved in a church, or be involved in different clubs which are out of interest these days, or to be to do what is considered mundane and boring, to say you became a farmer and you just did that your whole entire life. There are so many people who are turning their noses up at that type of lifestyle, when in many ways the level of freedom and self happiness associated with choosing to do something like that is almost off the charts. Most of the people I know who farm are very, very grounded and down to earth people and are actually quite happy with who they are. Sure, they've got financial strains. Who hasn't? Who hasn't got different experiences? But I think when you're thinking about the word freedom, freedom isn't necessarily about having every option available to you all the time. If we're all constantly discussing about what we want to have all of the time, then why are we doing anything at all? Our lives are not just about doing what we want to do all the time. Because if we do what we want all the time, there is no depth to our lives. If we have no depth to our lives, then what are we doing here? There is certain things I think about that really matter as a human being. I think at the end of the day, probably the thing that matters the most is the deep connections that we have with each another. Many times these days, our society is quite anti-marriage. Yeah, I think marriage is probably the greatest and most amazing depth experience that we can ever have in life. I think so anyway. What else is there? But at the same time, other people will say if you go off and meet and travel and meet lots of people from different cultures, you have a depth of experience which someone like myself would never have. I mean, I've traveled a bit, but some people have traveled a hell of a lot. And I would say in certain ways they're right. To travel and to experience different cultures brings a certain level of openness and understanding that even myself can't truly understand, because you've gone and experienced many cultures. But there's also another perspective on that. A person like myself, or people who are even less traveled than me, who have spent their whole life with a certain partner and have really got to know their partner. Their lives might be very simple and just play sport on the weekends and do all the normal little things that that normal people do. Have they not also got a sense of freedom that that person who's traveled around has never experienced? Because the people who are just living their everyday lives can really experience everyday life in a way that a person who has turned their nose up at it or who is excluded that can't really experience either. I mean, also the freedom to believe. I mean, freedom really, in the modern world, we get told constantly that we have to use different pronouns for different people, and we have to believe a certain thing a certain way, and we're not allowed to say this anymore, and we're not allowed to say this, and we're not allowed to believe this anymore, and this type of religion is now out, and we've got to believe in this type of thing. And I mean, realistically, is that freedom, where we've now got to narrow mind our own minds and we're not allowed to question? I mean, realistically, isn't our whole Western democratic system based upon the ability to question everything? I personally think this is what all science is about, is the ability to question. So the moment we start saying that a certain way of thinking is right or wrong, or it's just wrong. Well, to say that to believe a certain thing is freedom, to me, to say anything at all is a way to believe and a way to think is definitely not freedom. It's actually using the word freedom to enslave. So I think potentially in our modern world, if we're thinking freedom is freedom, because they use the word freedom, but yet we're behaving in a way which is not even contrary to what we want to do, because it is now societal norm, and you go, hey, we've got to be free because free is what it's all about. But all we do is we travel, we spend all our money, we buy big houses, we buy big cars, we have all the jewelry and all this stuff, but we're unhappy. Is that freedom? But what happened if you chose, and you really wanted to choose, to live more simply? You buy yourself a small house. You bring up a big family in that house. You have just enough money to pay for your bills. And you have a depth of experience in that world with your kids and your family that is profound. Is that not freedom if that's what you chose to do? Isn't that really not freedom? And if you chose to bring those people up in a traditional, say, Catholic experience, or a traditional something else, whatever, all right, and that was the choice of your life, and you chose to bring them up, but you brought them up with love and passion and and you sacrifice so much for that family and that experience and for your partner and stuff. Is that not freedom in another way? I'm not saying that, no, I am saying actually, freedom should be the real ability to question. I think, and to choose because of your questioning. If I was to say what I believe freedom really is, real freedom isn't the ability to choose certain thing. Real freedom is the ability to look at what is currently on offer and question it completely and decide whether something has value or not to you. Our society is telling us that there is a certain value in fancy clothes, going out for dinner, to travel, to buy overpriced expensive stuff, including houses and cars, to do all manner of things and to be judged based upon that set of criteria. I think it's all wrong, all right? The only criteria that should really matter is if you sit down and you go, what is important to me? What is important to my life? What type of person do I want to experience that life with? What is important? Not what is ridiculous. What is shallow? What is empty? Because realistically, the vast majority of what they classify as a freedom choice these days, and what they're offering as freedom, isn't really freedom at all. It's a heap of enticements and things to get you involved in a way which sucks you in and entices you to rack up huge amounts of debt so that you become enslaved and you're working all the time to pay off a never-ending level of debt that you constantly increase because you're miserable and you're trying to meet this criteria. Forget about this criteria, it's just pointless. We don't need anything. We grow old, we die. You know, you can get enough money quite easily to have a good life. And a good life does not mean what the Joneses have down the street. That's not a good life. A good life is only what's valuable to you. If a good life is valuable to you, and you have given up heaps of freedom, all the crappy, stupid freedoms that we have these days, and you give up the freedom to do whatever you want, but you have chosen a pathway for you, well, then I think you're truly free. Because freedom is the ability to commit and to make decisions and to experience life in a small world. I had a conversation with a number of my staff actually some time ago, and I thought it was a very interesting conversation. If you want to look at a small world, all right, give you an example. I pulled a flower out of my garden because I've got a microscope and I love science, right? The flower was about as big as my small finger. Now, that flower wasn't very big, but I put it under a microscope with my son, and I've got a big screen, so I put it on a big screen like this, and I'm sitting there with my son looking at it, and it's like, so the flower's about this big on my screen. And you know what I thought what happened in that little screen is two little antennas stuck out, and then ducked back into the middle of the antenna, and I'm going to myself, oh, how exciting. Anyway, next thing that happened is this little bug come out of there, run around that flower 4 or 5 times, and then duck back into the center of that flower. And that flower was only the size of my little finger. Not the little finger, the little nail of my finger. And I was so excited. I think that's what life is like. And I think it's exactly like that. When we choose a smaller part of the world and we say, that is what I'm going to have, then that little tiny flower can fill our whole world. And we can have a whole life inside that flower, which is magnificent, fulfilling, and quite frankly, a beautiful and wonderful experience. If we don't live our lives like that, then we don't get to experience life with real depth. The exclusion, the real freedom isn't having everything at a shallow level. It is excluding the vast majority so that you can use a microscope and looked at the depth and the brilliance and the magnificence of a small world. I had another friend of mine when I was discussing this in a bit of detail the other day, and he said to me that when his grandfather settled in South America, or Central America I think in his case, he found a piece of land from a mountain over here to a mountain over here, all right, and the valley in between, and he said, that is my land. I don't know if there's any history before it, but that's not the point. But when he found that land, he said, this is my land. All right, what did he really do? Did he make a big world or did he make a small world? I'm going to tell you, he made a small world. Because from the moment he said that mountain was my mountain, and the edge of this mountain, so that mountain over there and this valley between it is my land, what did he really do? He excluded the whole world outside of that mountain and said, this part of the world is all that matters. What did he learn then? He learned where the plants were, where the streams were, what lives on that land, what minerals was on that land, where the rocks were, how much water flows on the land. All right. He learned what was fertile, what was unfertile, what was usable, what wasn't unusable. And what he learned was that was his world. And he became a farmer from that day onwards, and he became a person who worked with wood, and he built his house, and he did everything else. His world became actually very small, but he also amplified that small valley. Otherwise, he would have walked through that valley. He could have walked through that and never ever remembered that valley. And he probably would have never remembered it ever again. But to him, that valley became his world. This is the way I think real freedom works, is you go off and you experience the world by making it smaller. So real freedom to me then is picking the piece of the world that we have around us and choosing, that's my mountain, that's my mound, this is my valley, and this is the valley that's going to matter to me. I'm going to know every plant in this valley. I'm going to know the water in this valley. I'm going to know the fish that swim in that creek or that river. I'm going to know the birds and the bugs, and I know where the fertile land is, and I'm going to have sheep, and I'm going to have goats, and I'm going to have cattle. I'm going to sow freaking crops over here. This is going to be my world. I personally think freedom is only the ability to choose a small part of this world and exclude everything else. Freedom is not, and has never been, the ability to have it all. The moment you say you're going to have it all, you're going to give the very best of yourself to something else. Sure, the guy who bought that land gave up everything else, and he gave all his best to that land. But he also got to enjoy the crops of the land. He got to enjoy the animals in that land. He got to enjoy the fishing in the creek. He got to enjoy getting married and building a homestead on that land. He got to enjoy having kids on that land. He got to watch the kids play in the creek. He got to enjoy the land and to enjoy the good and the bad times that come because of the world that he has chosen to be. Otherwise, what would he have been otherwise? He would have been a homeless man wandering aimlessly through the world, never-endingly. For what purpose? Why would you just wander aimlessly through the world? For what purpose? So you get to see beautiful landscapes that he would never ever see. But he would never had a family, he would never had the experiences, he would never had the depth, he would never had the fishing, he would never know something so deeply, so wonderfully. I think life is like that. I think freedom is definitely not what is sold to us in this stupid, dumbass world that we live in today. Freedom is to question why. Why are we in this stupid game of this stupid society doing the same stupid shit everyone else is doing all the damn time so that we can give our best, not to our own land, not to this piece of steak we think is important to us, but to give it over to the banks, to give it over to our governments, to give it over to someone else who takes the best of our energy and pours it into something else. Don't have it all. It's just not worth it. Everything, as soon as you have it all, you don't have basically a shallow, meaningless experience. And for what? What do we get for this shallow, meaningless experience? We get nothing at all. But if you have a small world, a small part of it, and you look deeply into it, there is power there. There is so much wonder in it. And in that depth and that wonder, there is so much brilliance. I personally think that wonder and that brilliance is all that matters in this world. we really got to expect and experience just the wonder of everything. Because realistically, I personally think the real freedom we have isn't in this world. It isn't in all the stuff, all the choices, or even from my case where I've been a plumber my whole life and thoroughly enjoyed that experience. And real freedom is to be able to question why we are here, the question, what is freedom to me, and to be able to choose that pathway. If we can get to choose that, holy crap. So the freedom isn't in our physical world, the freedom is in our minds. The freedom is to go and to say that mountain over there to this mountain over here, and what's between it is mine. Because realistically the land never changed because of that, but it changed because that world became his total focus. You know, when he chose that, and he was able to make paddocks for his cattle, and he was able to make fishing for his crops, with his kids, and he was able to build a homestead and watch the sunsets and the sunrises on his farm. You know, it's only then that the land molded to that decision. The land would never mold it if he just walked it through. If he just walked from one end to the other end and never made that decision, this is going to be my place, it would never change. When we make a decision in life and we look at it and we go, this is going to be my land, this is going to be my parcel, this is my piece, I'm going to choose to have a small house, I'm going to fill it with kids, and I'm going to do a job that I love to do, and I'm going to have a woman that I love and I'm going to share it with. And if that was a choice that you chose, I'm not saying that's what you have to choose, by the way, but that's what you chose, and you had an old second-hand car your whole life, and you went camping because it's all you could afford, and that's what you chose, and you chose it wholeheartedly, well then that world would mold just like that farm. That world would mold to match your desires, and it would be magnificent. I guarantee it'd be magnificent because you chose it and you're investing in it, and that is what your world is. And you make sure that you give everything to that world because it's magnificent. Because it's magnificent because you chose it, because you staked out that land and you said, this is my land. This is the way it is for society. This is the way it should be. We should always live to experience in such ways which are magnificent. Anyway, that's all I've got to say today. That's my waffle from Marcus Raimondo from Pondered. If you like what I've done, please say, let's go through it, what I'm meant to do. Tick the box, ding, like, and subscribe. I think that's what we're meant to say. I'm only new to this, or newish to this. So please come and say hey, and I'll see what else I can do. If you've got any things you'd like me to waffle on aimlessly about like I just have, please let me know in the comments, and I will see if I can have a waffle on about that. Cheerio.